All right. Well, welcome everybody to Conservation from the Couch, put on by the American Fly Fishing Trade Association and my good friend Brian Bennett from Moldy Chum, with support from Midcurrent, Rio, Orvis, 12 Weight, the Drake, Emerger Strategies, Sims Fishing Products, Road Drift Boats, Cheeky, Flywater Travel, High Street Strategies, Reddington, Fish Pond, Scott, Thomas and Thomas, the Fiberglass Manifesto, Allen Fly Fishing, Yellow Dog Fly Fishing Adventures, the Sustainable Angler, Gink and Gasoline, Rep Your Water, Umpqua, Nautilus, and Sage. My name is Ben Bulis. I'm the president of the American Fly Fishing Trade Association, based here in Bozeman, Montana. We work to promote the industry. We're the trade organization that helps promote the industry as a whole. And I'm going to turn it over to Brian Bennett here now. And I'm going to stop the sharing of my screen. And hopefully I do this correctly.
Hey everyone, Brian Bennett, Moldy Chum. Super stoked to be part of this team that kind of brought all this to life. And I'm also, striped bass are really important to me. Grew up on the East Coast. I'm based out here in Seattle. And so this is my home fish. And these are kind of my home people when it comes to what I like to do from an angling standpoint. I have a great opportunity to fish all over the world for some pretty exotic species, but I always go back to striped bass as my favorite. So I'm really excited about what I'm going to learn tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Lucas Bissett and Paul Moynister, who really were kind of the drivers behind kind of pulling this whole conservation from the couch thing together. I was happy to play a small part, but those guys are going to kind of help moderate the conversation. And Ben and I will kind of sit in the background monitoring the chat. So fire away questions if you have them, and really excited about tonight and the next three that we have coming up over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Brian, Ben.
Yes, we are very excited to do this. You know, Paul and I, a couple weeks ago, started talking about opportunities to make some people laugh and do some conservation talk and keep it at the forefront of people's minds, but in a way that we thought was digestible and sort of took in everything that we're dealing with. And so, you know, between a few funny phone conversations and probably a Zoom chat or two, this little baby was born. And we are happy to present tonight the one I am calling the Big Bang, because it is the first. This is the origination. So we're going to talk about stripers tonight. We're excited. We got some wonderful guests here tonight, some real experts in their fields. We have Tony Friedrich from ASGA, or the American Saltwater Guides Association. We have Willie Goldsmith, who is is it president now? CEO? I mean, like,
Boss
everybody's
executive director.
Executive director. I knew it was something like that. we have Miss Abby Schuster from Kisman Outfitters, and Mr. Kyle Schaefer up there in Maine doing his thing. He's got his Maine flannel on today, so he's representing for Maine. That is the official wear of Maine, apparently. That is their tuxedo. So loving it, looking good. How you want to proceed there, Mr. Paul?
Well, yeah, thanks so much, Lucas and Ben and Brian. And you know, we had a whole series of events that we had scheduled for the spring and summer that we were hoping to do around the country to have these types of conversations. And unfortunately, with everything going on in the world, they got canceled. And so that was a real bummer, but we're pretty excited to actually move this conversation online. And while it would be great to be in the same room with everybody, being able to clink beers and get us and talk about this stuff, unfortunately, that's not possible. But the neat sort of silver lining in all of this is that a lot of these conversations tend to happen in region. Like, you go to the fly shop, you know, in Massachusetts to have this conversation, or you know, you go into the Patagonia store in Boston or Maine or wherever to do this. And what we're pretty excited about is to take this conversation and to make it a national one. And we've got people from all over the country joining in to hear about the awesome work that ASGA is doing, you know, out in the Atlantic states. And so excited to have you all here for that. And over the course of the next few weeks, as we have these conversations, I definitely think you'll see how connected these fisheries are and how connected the challenges are, but also how connected the opportunities are for conservation. And so thanks everybody for signing up. Appreciate your patience as you bear with us. The awkwardness of doing this over Zoom, and excited to turn it over to all the folks who are joining us today, Abby, Willie, Tony, to sort of talk about, who they are, what they do, and and Lucas, you've got some funny questions lined up, I know, to get all of this started. So if you want to go ahead and toss your first softball out there for them.
Yeah, well, we didn't want to make this all about conservation, right? We wanted to make sure that people understood that we've all been locked away for months now, and that, like any good, castaway in your own home, if you will, we've all probably come up with some really cool opportunities that we never would have thought of before. And so inquiring's mind want to know if what is the craziest thing you've done in the last 2 months, or uncharacteristic thing that you may not have done prior to quarantine? And this is open. Let's start with Tony, because I see Tony staring at me from his fly fishing done. Don't shake your head, no, man. This is hot. This is real. You're taking it.
Well,
tell me what you got, baby.
Lucas, I don't really know if it has anything to do with the quarantine, unless, the stay-at-home order triggered the raccoon to move into my attic with its 3 babies. But the strangest thing that I've ever done, the strangest thing that I've done during quarantine was tangle with the mother raccoon and 3 babies at 10 o'clock at night. It was fun.
How did that go? Who won?
Hey, I still got 10 fingers and toes, man. It's funny when a mama raccoon sticks her arms out of the cage and grabs your pants and starts shaking them. That's comforting when you're on a ladder.
So the UFC match with the trash panda.
I'm still, the trash panda. And Lucas, you would have laughed. I
am laughing.
I take all the babies, and I drove her off into the marsh where she'd be nice and safe right next to the environmental center. And I take all the babies and I just put them in a little bunch about 30 feet back in the marsh, truck lights on. And then I get the cage out of the bed, put the cage down, open up the cage, and she bolted out and took like 4 steps and turned around and looked at me. And I was just like, oh God, go save your babies, please. And she turned back around and went and grabbed the babies. But man, there was a split second there. I was like,
oh, she was trying to decide.
Yeah, she was
like, she's like, them babies can fend for themselves. I need to get me some Tony.
Split second decision. So I defy any of the panelists to beat that for quarantine.
You don't have rabies. That's scary. God.
I'm not going to try, that's for sure. I will say, I don't know if this is crazy or completely on brand for everybody on this call. I live in downtown DC. I'm not near any salt water. It's tough because this is the time of year when I'd be out catching stripers and doing all that. And so, I can walk down to the tidal basin, I can catch carp and catfish and all that, but it isn't quite the same. What I found myself doing recently that I'm not too proud of is while I'm at home, watching TV at night, I just started tying fishing line on a rod to my dining room table and fighting my dining room table, testing the drag, getting some real, some heavy
Nice.
pullage there. And, the ceiling's a little bit too low for a 9-foot fly rod. So it's got the spinner and just hanging out, passing the time that way. So, it's not a great look, but it's helped me get by each day.
Well, what I want to know is, how do you take pictures with the dining room table and keep it wet?
Yeah.
How's that working?
It's a great question. That's something I've been looking into. I'll have to get back to you on that. So
Let me know,
about that when we
please.
talk about best practices for catch and release.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what we call that foreshadowing in the movie world. Miss Schuster, what you got?
Captain Abby, what are you talking about with this Miss Schuster, Captain Schuster?
There you go.
Sorry.
Well, I am currently opening a fly shop from my couch.
Perfect timing.
Okay.
Only I was a psychic and could see this coming, I might have delayed a bit, but I didn't. So here I am on my couch all day long trying to open up, which is pretty crazy. It's nuts, but it's okay.
That's not something you would have done 2 months ago, so that counts.
There you go.
No, I would not have.
Abby, do you know how you make a small fortune in the fly fishing industry?
How?
Start with a large one.
There you go.
Business
Ryan coming in
treating
hot
your
with the dad jokes. Schaefer, what you got? Or should I say Captain Schaefer? Sorry, I didn't realize we were so formal here on
Yeah, it's
conservation from the
formal. I
couch.
would have dressed differently. Um, God, probably. I mean, I think I got my boat ready at like the end of March this year. I mean, there's nothing to do on the water right now. I've been poling around in the marsh with no fish, just like trying to do something to stay sane, kind of find some kind of normalcy. But yeah. So I'm very ready. I'm very ready for anything.
For
Hey,
anything.
Kyle, didn't you run a little sunfish through your inlet? I don't know
Yeah,
if that's the safest thing in the world. You might ought to tell that story.
that's a good call. I've been pretty much, I mean, it's been like 5 out of 7 days have been stormy and windy. So I'm like, I got to, my father-in-law was like, hey, I've got this sweet little sunfish. Let's rig that thing up. And I'm like, heck yeah, Gary. So we got that thing out. I'm living on Plum Island in Massachusetts for quarantine right now. So I can take a short little stroll, rig that thing up, put on a wetsuit. And I've been out on that thing, like yelling at the top of my lungs, just like hanging it
I'm the
on.
captain now.
I sail. What about Bob? Anybody?
Awesome.
Yep.
Those are good. Those are honestly better than I expected. I want to be honest with you. I thought I was going to have to jazz those up, but those are great stories. I really appreciate that.
Well, I mean, Lucas, if you want, we can turn topic of conversation, which is what is the weirdest thing you've eaten during quarantine? I know that is a favorite of yours because every time I call you to talk about this stuff, you're deconstructing something and elevating something else. So we can go ahead and we can throw that to the panel, but you can go ahead and kick it off if you want.
I mean, we don't have to spend a bunch of time on this because nobody wants to talk about me eating, but I can tell you that as someone who has braved the barren land that is my pantry, and my fear of going outside has led to an interesting choice in how I've combined foods. And so I found myself the other day for a snack eating 2/3 of a deconstructed s'more, which entailed me just dumping marshmallows and chocolate chips in my mouth simultaneously and just chewing up those in my mouth. So the graham cracker was this beard, was the long and the short of it. I also have done a deconstructed pizza where I used my couch as a plate and had pepperoni, mozzarella cheese, and olives laid out. I was taking the mozzarella cheese and packing it like Big League Chew and just coming in hot with the crane arm and, throwing up a couple slices and some olives to get that salty goodness. And yeah, so no one wants to talk about that.
I hope for your sake this all ends soon.
Yeah, it's over. It's got to end soon. I had to go fishing today just so I stopped Big League chewing mozzarella. That's my first life goal.
Yeah. Lucas did call me one day. I don't think this is related, and said that he thinks that, his blood pressure's way up and that he might have diabetes. So
yeah, completely unrelated. Completely unrelated. Yeah, no, I didn't mention that to my doctor when we had our virtual visit. I left that out. Well, so, all right. So we don't have to get into the eating thing. I appreciate Paul for the throw out there. And now everyone knows my dirty.
Love to put you on the spot.
Yes, my dirty deconstruction secrets. But well, let's very quickly. Let's go through and let's just everybody give your 1-sentence synopsis of who you are, and then we're going to delve right into these wonderful fish, these striped bass. So let's start with Tony, since you're the center of my screen there, bud.
I am Tony Friedrich. I'm the Vice President and Policy Director of the American Saltwater Guides Association.
I'm Willie Goldsmith, Executive Director of the American Saltwater Guides Association, background in fisheries science, both looking at recreational fisheries economics and also some of the post-release mortality stuff we'll be talking about a little bit later today.
Captain Schuster, as I've been told.
There you go. I'm Abby Schuster. I own Kismet Outfitters on Martha's Vineyard, which is a fly fishing company.
Wait, Captain Schaefer.
I'm a fly fishing guide in Maine, sometimes guide other places, and yeah, pretty much just full time in the fly fishing industry.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate you all taking the time to be here and to inform the folks on this call about all of the really important issues going on with stripers. And we figured we want to start with, and Brian kind of alluded to this earlier, stripers have a really big pull for all of you. You've dedicated your lives to fishing for them, to protecting them, whether that's, you know, as a guide or whether that's starting your own organization like Tony's done with the American Saltwater Guides Association. So, you know, Kyle, I'll just throw this to you to start with, because, you know, you're somebody who guides all over the world. You spent last year living in the Bahamas. You were you were down in Argentina chasing golden dorado over the winter. And, you know, you still call Maine home, you call stripers, you know, your home waters. And so what is it about stripers that you love so much? And why is it that you feel so strongly about protecting them? And we'll just kind of go with that question, if you don't mind.
Yeah. You know, for me, striped bass were an entry point into fishing. Really, I grew up very close to Tony and Willie down in the Chesapeake Bay, where I could walk from my house growing up and catch catch pickerel, perch, catfish, striped bass, all in the same brackish water. So my earliest memories are fishing for stripers on the Chesapeake and, you know, in Cape Cod as well in the summer times. And, you know, it's a fish that, you know, connects me to greater stuff than myself. You know, it plugs you into a world that's pretty cool out there. You know, the bait, the birds, the weather, all the changing things. So stripers have meant a lot to me for a long time. And it's always, you know, I've guided in some other places, but it's always been a dream to guide for striped bass. You know, they're just such an accessible fish for people on the East Coast, and just an amazing fish for us.
Yeah, and I'll throw that to you, Abby. For those of you who don't know, Abby used to live right across the hall from me in Seattle. We were neighbors, and then she left me, unfortunately, and moved all the way back across the country to Massachusetts and to go guide for stripers. So why did you leave the majestic Pacific Northwest and all of our no steelhead that we have left in those waters on the East Coast?
Hey, that's another couple events.
I know
away,
that's
Paul.
that's
stop trying to
weeks.
jump ahead, but
My bad.
Away from the stripers. I left you for stripers because they're like Kyle, they're my first memory. I grew up fishing for them, and it's been a dream of mine to guide for them. And I get this question all the time because I'm out in the water every day, and people are like, do you ever get burnt out from guiding for stripers? And the answer is always no, because in one day you can fish from them from shore, inlets, in the rips, on the flats, like you're in Mexico. I mean, there's so many different, even I live on a small island, and there's so many different ways to catch these fish that, to me, it's really, really cool. And I also love that, like, you don't need a boat to get to them. Like, I'm very lucky that I have a boat and can get to them, and a lot of people are, but you can just go from the shore if you want.
Yeah.
For like an hour. It's not this huge thing, which, yeah, pretty lucky to be able to guide for them.
Yeah, and Tony, I'll toss it to you. I mean, you've been working your butt off here the last few years to get ASGA off the ground, and I know you've been working in this fight for decades. But not to age you too much there, but
It's the truth, Paul.
the gray beard kind of gave it away in the fly tying collection in the background, you know. But what is it that you love about these fish? You know, why is it that you've spent your life protecting them?
Thank you, Paul, for the question, and thank you guys for the opportunity to be on here. They're not the fastest fish. They don't jump the highest. They're not the strongest, but you know what everyone said before is true. They're easily accessible. They're like, in a lot of ways, they're like the bluegill of saltwater, because they are so accessible, and a lot of kids' first memories in saltwater. It doesn't matter if you have a $300,000 center console or you have $150 setup and a few plugs. You can catch a striper, and I think it's kind of every man's fish, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to me. I'm not a big picture guy. I don't take a lot of photos while I'm fishing. Face for radio.
Definitely not for webinar Zoom calls.
No,
sure.
No.
Lighting doesn't do you any favors.
But so I kind of have them all up. Memories of cool things that happen in big fish. And, all those fishing memories, stripers probably occupy like 7 out of the top 10. They're just so cool. You can catch them so many different ways, and they'll surprise you just when you think you got them figured out. It's a really special fish.
And Willie, toss it to you last, bud.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would echo that. They're the people's fish. It's I grew up in Massachusetts, and I think fishing for stripers. And what always amazed me is, like Abby was saying, you can catch these fish in beautiful areas. The flats of the vineyard, etc. You can also catch them in some pretty ugly areas. I grew up catching most of my biggest stripers as a kid by the TD Garden, the Boston Garden in downtown Boston. Stripers were not smashing bait in inlet. They were beating up on herring against the concrete bulkhead, under a rusty bridge by a construction cone in a shopping cart. And they're just such an incredible, resilient fish that they're available to everybody. Working at a bait shop north of Boston, you see people from all walks of life come in. As Tony was saying, for a couple bucks, and you can be in the game, and you have a chance of catching a really special fish, and you don't need to spend a huge amount of money. You don't need to travel far. As Abby said, it can be a quick outing after work. It can be a weekend bender when you sleep for 2 hours, during a slack tide or something. It's just an incredible opportunity for everybody up and down the coast. And, we're in a densely populated area on the East Coast, but these fish, they are just everywhere or they should be everywhere. And it just provides an incredible opportunity for everybody who wants to get involved.
Lucas, all you, man.
Yeah, man. No, appreciate it. I was just thinking about like the Sam's Club striper because of the grocery cart. Like that was that was making me laugh. I enjoyed that for sure.
We call it city structure where I come from. You don't look for rocks and brush piles. You look for shopping carts, construction cones, and stop signs.
Nice. So, as we've all had to deal with this, COVID thing, and we've all been stuck at home, and we're making light of it. It's also been obviously a pretty devastating thing for all of our businesses, and everybody's had to come to grips with what they were going to do with it. How do you think it's affecting the striper fishery right now? Like good, bad? Give us the highs, give us the lows. What do you think? What do you think is going to be, as we look back on this thing, has been the biggest, maybe the rewards and the biggest challenges? Tony, I'll start with you.
Ooh. That's a tough one. So Lucas, we're talking about how far you want me to go back with stripers. I mean, we can go. I want to be a little conscious of time.
Well, I mean, there's obviously let's not go all the way back.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's important to note that, stripers at one time, they were a success story. And so if, let's go there, let's start there. So stripers were successful.
Yeah. Stripers were heavily overfished, and the population crashed 80s. When I was younger, stripers were just a dream, right? You never saw one. You just heard about them, saw pictures of them. And I think we were fishing for bluefish from the beach one day, and a whole bunch of the guys ran down and saw a guy. He had hooked like a 16-inch striper, and it was like somebody had found a white rhino. And then they just they had good consecutive spawns. We had a moratorium on them for a few years, and then they had good consecutive spawns, and they just came back like gangbusters. And it was a success story. It was probably one of the greatest fisheries success stories of our time, certainly. And they reached an abundance where, I mean, man, if you fished for them in the late 90s up to about 2006, it was the most incredible fishing I have ever experienced. Just acres, what you dream about, acre upon acre of giant bass, down at the Bay Bridge Tunnel. Gannets crashing, these huge fish eating this giant bait, like just hooked up constantly, getting towed around. And then it ended, and we started to see a pretty serious decline. As there's more fish in the population, there's more effort. More people will go fishing when you're going to experience a success rate like that. So the more fish in the water, the more trips are going to be taken, and it took its toll on the fish. And Lucas, you guys have a slot limit. Well, kind of a slot limit on redfish. You try to protect the big ones, and we just hammered them. and they're an old fish. They don't come back quick, and it's showing. We're at like 27-year lows now in the striped bass population. You know, you can go out and still catch them, but the quality, the size of the fish is just, it's not even a shadow of what it was. And you know, it's hard to watch, man, when you saw the victory, you know what happened with good management, and then we've seen it just slowly slipping away for so long, and here we are. You know, we're slugging it away with management. You know, if you want to talk about success stories, you know, the striped bass management issue is really, you know, we're like right in the middle of it. We're just starting a 2-year process to review kind of a lot of the management objectives, and, you know, all sorts of wonderful fisheries policy terms that people will roll their eyes if I start talking about. But you know, we can't say this is a loss yet. It may be another one of the greatest wins. We don't know. But that's the position that we're in with stripers. That's what we're fighting for. So it really is an incredible story for fisheries. Everyone should learn from it. You know, Mother Nature's an incredible thing, and if you give it half a chance, it's going to come roaring back. And you know, maybe I'm an idealist, but I think we'll get them back again. I think they'll come back.
So, Tony, thanks for that. You know, talking about COVID-19 specifically, you know, what you know, Willie, maybe you can touch on whether or not you've seen more effort, less effort, you know, things like that. What has anything changed there with people being out of work or off work, or, you know, all those things?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think, you know, there are kind of two elements, right? One of the elements is the fishery, and then the other element is the fish themselves and kind of how they're doing. In terms of the fishery, you know, certainly, you know, we're a guides association. We know that, you know, our folks have been out of work for a while now. That's kind of changing a little bit. You know, there's been a pretty uneven response up and down the coast in terms of which states have allowed for higher fishing, which haven't. And, you know, of course, we're not public health professionals. We're not in a place to tell people if they can go or not. You know, what we've been trying to do is make sure that when it is safe for guides to get back on the water, you know, we're hopefully going to be able to do so. So we've been working pretty hard on that front. On the other hand, you know, as you alluded to, you know, private anglers are allowed to go out, and there have been a lot of people fishing, certainly off New Jersey, you know, both from shore and from their private boats. And one of the big kind of unknowns here, Lucas, is that we really don't know what's going on in the water right now. I think, you know, with so many parts of, you know, our world being kind of on hold right now, among those are the marine recreational information programs, dockside intercept surveys that look at how many fish are being caught. We don't have that information right now for 2020, just because those folks aren't able to do their surveys as they normally would. So we're going to end up with kind of a black hole in data for at least a couple months here in the spring. And so that's going to be tough. It's going to be, you know, partially a science question, trying to figure out, you know, can we somehow estimate how many fish were harvested? But it's also going to be a management question, because we're not going to know. And so it's going to be a question of, you know, what do we do with that uncertainty? And that's going to be a big question for later this year as we think about management measures. So certainly complicates things a bit.
Yeah, as COVID has done so well.
Yes.
I also feel like, just so I can't guide right now because the state of Massachusetts is closed, and I totally get that. And I love that people are out fishing. But as a guide, I do feel like it is my responsibility to teach, you know, how important the fish are in the water more so than out. And I know all my friends that are guides feel very similar. And a lot of people that are fishing now might either not know the regulations, or just because they're new to fly fishing, which is great, or fishing in general, or they can't really be enforced. So I think that's what's scary to me about it, is like, there's so many more people out there without, you know, being on a paid charter or being with people that really enforce the rules, which is crazy.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's one of the kind of interesting aspects of this fishery, right? Is that, I mean, as all of you talked about, the stripers are very much the every person's fish, right? Like everybody can get out and chase them, whether it's from the beach or whether it's that super expensive console. So, center console. So, I mean, I know we were talking about this the other day, Willie, but I mean, so much of the challenges there are a management challenge, right? And if, I don't know, Willie, if you could just kind of just to pull this conversation out a little bit and just give a little bit of perspective, so some of the statistics that you were talking about the other day regarding just like what percentage of, you know, angling pressure and anglers on the water is happening in your region. It's so much higher than I would have anticipated.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's you know, I think the U.S. East Coast, and Tony knows these numbers better than I do, but I think along the East Coast, we account for about 67% of all recreational angling trips that happen, you know, not including Florida in the United States. That's a huge number of trips. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, you know, you can go to your local bridge and, you know, throw a chunk of mackerel off and maybe catch a great fish, catch a great striper. And, you know, one big challenge is, you know, we're not, you know, it's the old adage, we're not managing fish, we're managing fishermen. And, you know, I see an economist on the call, Brad Gettner, and it's worth mentioning, you know, one big question that we often have is how do various conditions affect what people are going to do? So how are regulations going to affect how often you go fishing? How about fish availability? How about the cost of bait, the cost of fuel? There are so many variables out there that make it really difficult to say, you know, what is COVID-19 going to do to fishing effort? Are people going to be scared so they're not going to go out of their house? Or are people going to be bored and they'll be fishing more than ever? It's really hard to say. There's been a lot of great work in the past to try to model these kinds of behaviors, and also to look at the value of, you know, harvesting a fish and taking it home versus, you know, how valuable is it to you to let a fish go? And I think those are really incredible, you know, really incredibly important questions, which are great in kind of a normal world. Right now, of course, it's kind of run in uncharted territory, and it's going to be tough to say. But trying to untangle some of those questions around motivation and preferences are really pretty critical to understanding how to manage the resource.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly too, it's something like 67% of the poundage of fish that's harvested, or there's something around striped bass being the most harvested fish on the East Coast too. So it's not only just that there's a lot of pressure, but there's also a lot of them taken out.
They're up there, I think, and don't quote me on this. I think they're definitely in the top 5 in terms of numbers of fish harvested.
Mm-hmm.
And it, you know, it's interesting because with stripers, of course, it is predominantly it's a recreational fishery. You know, folks might think it's, you know, that commercial fishermen are to blame here, and they're really not when it comes to thinking about striped bass status. And that Tony was talking about 90% of striped bass, you know, removals, mortality is from the recreational side. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind here, that it is, you know, it is us. You know, we need to kind of look at ourselves in the mirror and figure out what can be done here.
Well, that was I didn't necessarily mean to make this blue, but apparently, according to the background, I've made this a little blue in the conversation.
You're in a nightclub.
I'm in a Smurf nightclub right now. You know, we're about to get down.
Just start swimming with it. Like I'm good to see. As
the sun goes down, apparently my house gets bluer. I never realized, but now I see why I can't see as well. So to bring this to a more of a 30,000 level foot, you know, something that people can maybe wrap their heads around a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about effects on the striper fishery through climate and what that could mean. I honestly believe this, and this is something I tell myself on a daily basis because I think it's absolutely true, is that we as fishermen have the opportunity to get a national conversation started around climate change. I think that we are seeing it in real time. I know that here in Louisiana, I can tell you specific things that are happening around climate. And so for me, I am ready to start having conversations that address the issues that I'm facing. And I hope that other fishermen are as well, because it's something that we're on the front lines. We're seeing it first. And so I can't imagine that stripers are able to not be affected by this stuff. So, you know, I'll just kick this out to the group. You know, if somebody wants to say, Kyle, I haven't heard from you. I'm going to call on you, Kyle. You're to my left here, next to the blue house. Tell me what climate has done for you, or what you've seen, especially being in Maine. I mean, you've had to see some stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Maine's such an interesting place to be in this climate change conversation because, you know, the Gulf of Maine is a body of water that's warming. I think, you know, it's at least 95% faster than the rest of the world's ocean. So it's kind of like this whole, you know, this ground that is a little bit of like a test for a lot of waters in the rest of the world. You know, we're seeing different species coming in that we haven't had in the past. People are catching bonito, which haven't typically been much further north than Cape Cod. Black sea bass are, much more available. Lobsters are marching north. And then, as related to striped bass, we're typically kind of at the northern migration of striped bass. And, and I wonder what I might be guiding for in 10 years if things continue to happen at the rate that they're happening. So you're seeing it on a daily basis. You're seeing, serious things changing. And especially as you travel from Maine to Rhode Island to Massachusetts and fishing some of these different waters, you're just encountering stuff that I never have in all of my life. So it's, you're seeing it firsthand, and it seems, especially the past 4 or 5 years, it just seems to be, I don't know, just more obvious. But
Yeah,
I
I'm
agree with
definitely
that.
there too. Go ahead, Abby. I'm sorry.
No, I disagree. Like the last 4 years, it's crazy how much it's changed. Like we are catching so many black sea bass. First off, we were getting bonito the end of July, which is really early. And then this fall, we were getting Spanish and king mackerel regularly, which like is not normal at all. Like almost as regularly as bluefish, which is crazy.
I'm going
Yeah,
to take your word for that.
Well, and Tony, this ties really, I think, a lot into the habitat and management questions around it too. I know you're kind of at the epicenter there at the Chesapeake Bay. You're seeing a ton of climate change impacts there as well, right?
Yeah, Paul, I've lived pretty darn close to the water in the Chesapeake Bay for almost 25 years now. And let me tell you, man, we're seeing some stuff that is, certainly never seen before. As an example, Virginia's having a limited opening of a commercial shrimp fishery. I think they had like 3 or 4 guys doing it, but they're actually, VMRC is looking at, the way to set up regulations, let people enter the fishery, because there are white shrimp everywhere here. And that is crazy. We have grass shrimp, I've never seen a white shrimp. They've done NOAA's done a lot of work in the Chesapeake Bay. We're fortunate that they have an office here, great people. What they're looking at, not long-term, short-term, is probably within the next 10 years. They wrote a wonderful paper on this. This is the Chesapeake Bay in total, not just certain areas, but it's going to turn into like a speckled trout, red drum, croaker spot, that kind of fishery. There'll always be stripers here, I believe, but it's just not going to be quite as friendly a place for them. It's going to be more in tune to what would be, species that we would catch 100 miles to the south, which goes exactly in line with what Abby's saying, that she's catching, mackerel, that Kyle's striper season is a little bit longer. It's well documented. You have black sea bass, summer flounder, the biomasses have all shifted north. It's so real that the councils are looking at how to reallocate the resource, because there's more fish in certain areas. Massachusetts black sea bass quota is from a while back. And since you've had this shift, you got all these black sea bass now, is that quota still fair? These are the things that they look at on the council level. So, it's an accepted thing. And when Lucas said, fishermen could really, enter this conversation with eyes wide open about climate change, it's because we do see it every day. Look, this is not anecdotal. The creek by my house, a lady caught like a 3-pound pompano, a Florida pompano in Maryland. They caught a 27-inch tarpon in a pound net 20 miles north of my house in October. So I don't know, that doesn't happen normally. There's a couple around here and there, but when you start having state records for pompano and triple tail, in Maryland DNR, it kind of makes you scratch your head a little. So Lucas, I think you're right. I think it's time that we have a conversation about it. We see it. If you're a fisherman, it's hard to deny. If spending time in the water, you see it happening.
Well, and one of the things that we've talked about in the past, Tony, and I think this is kind of where we're headed with with stripers is talking about, you know, Magnus and Stevens and its opportunity to potentially bring in some of the much needed backstops that right now the commission doesn't necessarily have. And so with that, you know, the Magnuson reauthorization that's currently in the process, we can also start talking about climate, you know, ready fisheries and opportunities to start to address some of those transitions that are being seen with fish shifting north. You know, and I can tell you right now that if redfish show up in your neighborhood, those babies are like me raiding the pantry, baby, because they coming in hot looking for marshmallows and chocolate chips. And you can
Mozzarella, like Big League Chew.
I'm telling Big League Chew on the side.
Mozzarella.
Yes, sir. They eat. They do eat. So they will be in there.
Lucas, you know, the crazy thing is we get the big ones. We don't get the little ones that are kind of cyclical. If they have a real good spawn on our side on the Atlantic, we can get a, you know, there's more of them, so they spread out more, and we could have a real good, you know, small red drum fishery. But the big ones are becoming regular. Like you can actually go out and target them, and they're on schools of adult menhaden, and it's crazy. It's what we call like a pumpkin patch, man. It's crazy. And I never in my life thought I would see that 15 miles south of my house. Never.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So Lucas kind of did talk, you know, touch on that. I think said definitely, you know, looking at Madison Stevens and thinking about, you know, how can that law be enhanced moving forward? And I think certainly, you know, thinking about climate is a huge is something that we've been focusing on a lot. I think, you know, as we've discussed, you know, fish are shifting among other things, and you know, that's creating all sorts of challenges for management. We recently saw the you know, our Atlantic cobia fishery change over from the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council to the Atlantic States Fisheries Commission, because they're now being encountered, you know, further and further north, and Virginia is now a big time harvester, whereas they haven't always been in the past. And so there's going to be a lot of questions around, you know, can we create a governance framework that's kind of more nimble than what we have now, you know, to be able to share the resource across the jurisdictions we have. You know, it's not really in place right now. So we've got all sorts of inefficiencies where, you know, on the commercial side, for example, people are traveling further than they should and landing fish in places that don't make sense because of where they historically were. And that's certainly not, you know, I'm not so much talking about striped bass as of so many other species that, you know, are on both coasts. But I also, before we kind of, you know, move on from climate, I think it's important to mention, you know, it's not just about the fish moving north and everything is hunky-dory and, you know, the fish are fine. I think, you know, this is a fundamental change to the ecosystem. You know, as Tony said, we have new species coming in and competing with species that are already there, which may or may not be moving. We have potential, you know, variability or impacts at the individual level. So for striped bass, you know, one big thing we look at every year is recruitment. You know, how many little striped bass are produced, and a good recruitment year is basically marked by high water flow, by lots of rain, and by cold temperatures. And of course, in Chesapeake Bay in the next 20, 30, 40 years, that may well be changing a lot. And this is our predominant source of the Atlantic migratory stock for stripers. So, you know, what is that going to do? There's a lot of great research going on, but there's also a lot of unknowns and things we have to kind of be cognizant of that will be, you know, really important for managing the resource moving forward.
Lucas, just super quick, you had mentioned MSA, and you know, there's Congressman Cunningham put out a fisheries climate bill. We were very encouraged by that, and then Congressman Huffman initiated a really just an incredible effort to reauthorize Magnus and Stevens, which is, you know, the fisheries law of the land. He really did it in a bipartisan fashion. He had listening tours all around the country, Hawaii, California, you know, East Coast, you name it, Pacific Northwest. He was down by you in the Gulf, Lucas.
Yep, by you.
Yeah, he was up by us in Baltimore, and just a great guy. Really wants to be fair to everyone, which is absolutely to be applauded. It's on hold right now. Obviously, you know, as Willie has been saying, COVID has sucked the air out of the room with what we would normally do with fisheries policy. And now we have shifted, you know, to helping our guys get back out on the water and navigate this disaster relief stuff. But, you know, Magnuson is a big success story. We're super stoked to get this started again and get past all this mess and work with Congressman Huffman and a ton of folks across the aisle to really make our fisheries incredible, for the next 20 years. Really, really absolutely look forward to that. So it was really encouraging today too, because there was a big bipartisan push for a fisheries disaster relief bill. It was 1.5 billion, Willie. 1.5 billion. 25 senators in all signed it. The House of Representatives came out with their own letter. You had Congressman Huffman from California, Democrat, and Garrett Graves on there from Louisiana, a Republican. It's great to see. It was great because you look at the layout of politics right now, but then you see something like this happen, and it wasn't Republican, it wasn't Democrat, it was all the folks on the coast sticking up for their fishermen. So that really, it was very heartwarming. It's great. It's great to see them doing what they need to do for their people. So anyway, I just wanted to throw a thanks in there for that letter that was sent out of Senate House of Representatives today, since we were talking about MSA, and there's so many important players that care about fisheries, and I think it's a real bright spot. It's going to be great moving forward to get this done. So
that's good to hear. And I appreciate everybody, sending in questions. If you have any questions, we're going to open up to questions here in about the next 5 or 10 minutes or so. So please go ahead and put those through on the chat. But just to sort of wrap up, questions that I have, and this has kind of been touched on, but one of the themes that's going to kind of emerge from these different conversations, and, being somebody who's based in Washington, like the difference between federal management and state management and the impacts that has on our fisheries is something that I know is a huge issue on the Atlantic with stripers. It's a huge issue down in the Gulf with redfish, and it's a big issue in Washington, and it was steelhead. And just really curious, if you wouldn't mind just giving the very, the quick and dirty kind of 30,000 foot synopsis of the management challenges that are in place and the tension between the local and the federal management and how Magnuson fits into all of that stuff. I know you guys have done a ton of work on that.
Willie, you'll probably say it better and quicker than I could, and I feel like
definitely quicker, Tony. There's no doubt about that.
Hey, I know my weaknesses, Lucas. I'm not
so do I. So do I. Willie, take it away.
Yeah, Willie, go quick.
I will be very brief, and I will let Tony jump in. Where he sees fit. This has been his world for a lot longer than it's been mine. We have the Madison-Stevens Act, as we've discussed. It's been around for 45 years. It manages all of our fisheries in federal waters. That's from 3 to 200 miles offshore. For waters from 0 to 3 miles offshore, our coastal waters, here in the Atlantic, we have the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which is an interstate cooperative of 15 states from Florida up to Maine, that basically come together and manage, your striped bass, menhaden, those kinds of coastal species, cobia now. Magnuson has very strict, Magnuson is a federal law. It's got very strong and strict rules for rebuilding that have been added through reauthorizations in 1996 and 2006. Time frame for rebuilding, probability of rebuilding in a given time frame. Those kinds of very strict protocols that have to be adhered to. And the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, because it is not bound by federal law, does not have to comply with those. So it kind of, and that doesn't mean that folks at ASMFC don't want to do the right thing. It just means that there is not the federal mandate to get to a certain point by a certain time, and that kind of lack of that flexibility can be a slippery slope in terms of getting to where we want to be. I'm sure Tony wants to add to that very briefly.
I'll put it in, Willie, thank you for that incredible synopsis, and I was correct in my assessment. I will add a little color to his play-by-play and just say, as a shining example, the reason why we're in the mess that we are with striped bass, there's a wonderful blog about this on the Guides Association website. We'd love to see you visit there. The reason why we're in the mess that we are in is because the commission is set up the way that it is. When they make a decision that goes against their own rules, they cannot be sued. There is no accountability. It's one of those weird things that I am not an attorney, much like Willie and I are not health professionals. But it's without that legal, 10-pound sledgehammer, essentially we are watching things in the very recent past, like striped bass are supposed to be recovered within 10 years when they're overfished. And now when they decided, you know, hey, we have to change regulations with striped bass, we have to rebuild them. Here's this whole framework, this whole law that we have to follow, and we'll run the numbers, and 13 years, that's fine. And you're like, wait, I thought it said 10 years right there. And they're like, nah, yeah, 13 years is okay. So, you know, it's really, really frustrating when you want these fish to come back. And you know, it's not flexibility. Flexibility is great. It is just not following the rules. And it's absolutely frustrating. They need some oversight. They need some accountability. And that's something that we are going to work really hard on, because it'll impact so many inshore fish that are so important to all of us. And you know, we're looking forward to getting past the situation that we're in right now so we can start addressing these issues.
Awesome. So we have a couple questions. I got one on the Q&A here.
Well, real quickly, sorry, Lucas, to interrupt.
No.
Before we get to that, it'd be great just to quickly, you know, we're calling this Conservation from the Couch, not only because we're trying to bring people information to their couches about these conservation issues, but we want people to be able to take action from their couches and be able to support the striper fishery. And so I just wanted to turn it over to y'all. I know you've got some really great things going on and some ways that people can support the work that you're doing. And so if you wouldn't mind, I'll just throw it out to the group for what are things that people can be doing from their couch, you know, now in the next 6 months, in the next year, to be fighting for striped bass.
Sweet.
Willie, you want
The
to give
first
Willie
time I didn't see Tony jump in. What's happening?
play color?
Oh my goodness. Sure, I am happy to. Well, first off, I will give a shameless plug for ASGA. We're starting up a webinar series, and we'll be hosting a webinar on Tuesday, May 26th. It's going to be called How to Be an Effective Fisheries Advocate. So, you know, we can really get into the nitty gritty in terms of, you know, how to approach management, both at the regional council level, the fisheries commission level, as well as, you know, at the level of federal legislation. So, you know, a lot of excitement to come from that. I think, you know, if we move off the couch a bit, thinking just about, you know, the wonderful day when we'll all be back on the water doing our thing. I think one way that folks can really be powerful advocates for the fish is in terms of how they handle their fish when they're catching them, and just getting into kind of the discard mortality discussion a little bit, which I will be brief on, recognizing that we do have questions from the audience. But, you know, when it comes to striped bass, you know, 90% of the fish, as I said, 90% of the mortality is from the recreational side. Half of that is from catch and release mortality, fish getting let go that just don't survive after release. That isn't because all the fish are dying. About 9% of them, based on the best science we use right now, are dying, but it's just because there are over 20 million caught that are let go, and that adds up. There's been a lot of great work in the past looking at the reasons for why fish die. You know, they range from, you know, for example, fish that swallow a bait and get gut hooked and the liver or the heart get pierced, or you have fish that are caught in very warm water with low dissolved oxygen, as well as low salinity in freshwater. Stripers do not do well when they're getting released. For fly fishermen, you know, it's the physical injury piece isn't really, you know, as big of an issue. You know, you're typically not getting a fish swallowing a fly. So I think, you know, it's much less on the physical damage side of things that fish might get harmed through catch and release, through fly fishing, and much more on the physiological side. So, you know, you're fighting a fish with a 5 weight that you should be fighting on a 9 weight, or you're bringing a fish out of the water for 20 photos that take a minute and a half, while you should be keeping that fish in the water, you know, keeping it wet, keeping them you know, kind of preventing those gills from collapsing or doing any of those things. So I think, you know, as a fly fisherman, I would say, you know, for the most part, just, you know, treat the resource with respect. You know, don't fight the fish for too long. Keep them in the water when you can. Certainly avoid fishing, you know, in really hot weather, or especially when it's hot weather and you're fishing in freshwater, you know, like up in the upper Chesapeake Bay. We've produced some great infographics to kind of show, you know, some of these differential impacts, but that's one way that folks could definitely help the resource while still enjoying it in the future.
Thanks, Willie.
Yeah, that's an awesome way to,
Yeah.
to
Well,
participate.
Well,
yeah.
Lucas, with that, just the plug that Willie, I want to just kind of tie all this up before we start taking questions. And
You better tie like you're in a rodeo, brother. Let's go.
Not like you're tying a game changer, Tony.
You want one of my game changers, Will. Again, now it's gonna be now you another month before you get one. What Willie's saying, I'm sure there's trout fishermen and other people that are listening to us right now. Hopefully, a few. I think we're all connected, right? It doesn't really matter if you're fishing for striped bass or trout in a river or steelhead on the West Coast. We all have the same issues, and with all the meetings we've done across the country, you can only teach people so much, and that's why we're coming out with this webinar series on how to be a good advocate, because that's the number one question that we get. And again, I think it ties all of us together. It doesn't really matter what fish you catch. They all kind of face the same problems. And I think inherently we love what we do. We're really passionate about the resource, and it's a great way to give back and also learn a heck of a lot about the biology of the fish, the problems that they face. You can become an expert if you put your time in and really protect something that you love. So we do invite anyone and everyone we'll have a link up on our website probably tomorrow to register for our how to be a good advocate, and hopefully we can start developing people in both sides of the country and down in the Gulf as well, and have a bunch of people fighting for the fish. That would kind of be a dream come true. So we're all in the same boat. It doesn't matter where we live.
Totally agree.
And if you can go to that website, I'm sure there's a place to sign up and register to stay informed, right, about all of these things.
Yeah, the first thing that pops up is sign up to our newsletter, and we'll have, just search saltwaterguidesassociation.org. As my kid would say, search it up. I don't even know what that means. I
like to search down.
I know he talks to me. I'm just like, okay. So yeah, saltwaterguidesassociation.org, and I'll make sure that link is up there for our class. But we think it's the best way to help the resources to kind of create a whole bunch of advocates out there that know how to make change. So really important to us.
So that's a good transition to a question that we have about advocates, and I want Kyle and Abby to field this one. How do you see the role of fly fishing companies and guide services in affecting positive change with regards to climate change? And that comes from Ethan Ingeman over in Boulder, Colorado.
I guess I'll go. Thanks, Ethan. I feel so incredibly lucky that I've been able to make my life to be a striper guide or saltwater fly fishing guide. And I feel like part of my job is to not only pass on that passion, but also I've dedicated so much of my life to learning the environment and learning how to care for these fish. And the best thing I can do is pass it on to my clients. I do only do catch and release, and I do take them out of the water sometimes for photos. I mean, if it's your first striped bass, that's a huge moment, but just to teach how to do that responsibly and how to fish for them and, take action or just be responsible when you're out there and just realize how lucky you are to be out there. And if you can be a teacher, I think you'll pass that on to many.
Well, and piggybacking on that before we go to Kyle is, I think one of the things that we have all learned over the years of doing this is that one of the ways that you can stave off changing or bad events is to build resiliency in a stock. And so by treating these fish with respect and getting them back in the water as fast as possible and ensuring that they have a better chance of survival means that you're going to keep that resiliency in the stock. And that is how they are going to be able to adapt to change. If you keep them on the brink of disaster, those changes are going to have a more ill effect and a quicker result in failure. So just sort of adding to that, Abby, those are great suggestions.
Well,
Kyle?
true,
Sorry, go ahead, Abby. Go ahead, finish up.
But if you experience it, there's no way, in my opinion, that you won't want to protect it. So I think getting people out on the water and seeing how amazing this ocean is and these fish it's creating an army to be able to stand up and be like, we want to protect these fish, and this is how we're going to do it. I mean, I think
Abby, real quick as a guide, you know, I think people inherently, you know, when they step on Kyle or Abby's boat or Lucas's boat, they inherently have a lot of respect for you. They're going to listen to you. You know, it's a unique profession. So, you know, when you're telling them about, you know, a lot of times when you're not catching fish, it's all how good a conversation you can make with your client, right? So when you tell them about the ecosystem and everything, I think it's a pretty easy way to start to talk about climate change, because you have people who just inherently trust you and respect you when they step on the boat, right?
Well, we can also give them the firsthand knowledge. Like, here, look at this, look at this right here. This has changed.
And
I know that's a big thing that Kyle does, and I know it's a big thing that Abby does as well.
So Kyle, go ahead if you got something.
Yeah, that's a good question, Ethan. And I think, like, specifically, you know, you mentioned, like, what is the role of fly fishing companies and guide services, which I think are both, you know, we're businesses that are making money off of these wonderful ecosystems. So I think, like, I take it for me very seriously, and I'm the main board member for the Saltwater Guides Association. I'm very, very proud of that. I've always, you know, probably for the past, I can remember, you know, specific moments in school in environmental science of being like the aha moment of, like, I'm going to have moments where I hope to be in a position where I can talk about this stuff and maybe have an impact. And, you know, and so as a fly fishing guide, I see it as, you know, such a very important, serious thing to do. I mean, it can be lighthearted conversations, but having the ability to talk to people on the boat every day, whether it's Argentina this winter, or whether it's, you know, striped bass this summer in Maine, you know, those conversations all connect through all the different parts of the world. And, you know, and really, if we're not doing our part, you know, it's all of our livelihoods are in jeopardy. You know, not to mention it's in jeopardy for all the recreational users as well. So, you know, I think I take it as, you know, it's something that it's a duty, you know, it's kind of protecting your living, but also protecting the thing that gives you some of the most joy. So,
Yeah. Hey, Lucas, I got another question.
Yeah, bud.
I just received. And I'm going to point this towards Tony. How concerned are you that the 28 to 35 inch slot limit is going to decimate the 2015 year class of striped bass? It seems to be that there are a lot more 26 inch fish this season that are probably from the 2015 year class. By the end of the year, they will be entering that slot.
Wow. Whoever asked that question, you know your stuff.
Tom?
Yeah, I'm really concerned. You know, it's always easier to catch a smaller fish. And so when we had the list of options to advocate for when the striped bass reductions were on the table last year, we wanted a 35 and over, and I understand, you know, everyone wanted a slot limit. I get it, but, you know, you can't take these decisions out of context. So there aren't a lot of fish that are over 35 inches anymore. Like, compared to years past, there aren't. So we figured, hey, if we make it a 35 inch limit, that's going to reduce harvest quite a bit. The fish will be able to spawn a couple of times before they get harvested, and it worked before. Like, the regulations coming out of the moratorium for most of the coast were one fish at 36 inches, and they came roaring back. So it's like, why reinvent the wheel? This worked before. And there was a big push to have a slot limit 28 to 35. And I think there were good intentions in there. I think some very smart managers believed that could work. They got a lot of pressure from other people besides us. We went for something else. But there is a deep concern. You know, striped bass spawn good once every 4 or 5 years. It's based on environmental conditions, like Willie said before. You know, high cold water, best thing for a striper spawn. So the 2015s are a very abundant year class, and they're kind of the last hope for a quick recovery on striped bass. If they can make it to spawning age, there is a great chance that there could be a good spawn, especially this year was a little wet. 2018 was like the apocalypse with rain. I don't think that'll ever happen again. But yes, I have a deep concern for the 2015s getting ready to enter the meat grinder. And I know there's an awful lot of them from New York, New Jersey to Massachusetts right now. There is a ton.
Yeah.
And what else is that going to do to finish the question? That's going to increase effort. So be careful at the commission meetings when people start talking about, no one's fishing because of the virus. Bull. It's a black hole of data. We're never going to know what people did in 2020 during the virus because there's literally no data collection going on, but there's a lot of people fishing. So yeah, it's a very scary thing that those 2015s are starting to get into the meat grinder. Let's keep our fingers crossed some of them make it, and let's keep our fingers crossed that maybe this year we could get a good spawn. I mean, we need a couple of good spawns, and these fish can come back. But awesome question, and yes, I'm very concerned about the 2015s.
Great. Thanks, Tony. Hey, so for everyone that's listening, if you have any questions, and we didn't bring this up earlier, if you click on the bottom in the chat, you can enter a question right there, and we'll see them, and then we'll go through them as many as that we can.
So we do have a question that came in through the chat earlier. This is for Willie. It says, what conversations have been had about racial and socioeconomic discrepancies between sustenance and recreational anglers?
Got it. Yeah.
The question wasn't addressed to Willie. It was addressed to Dr. Goldsmith, which makes me think that we've been
Yes,
a jerk to call him Willie.
Sorry, my bad, Willie.
To continue the thread of formality, and that is my friend Rob. So I appreciate the jab there, Rob. That's a great question, and I think we often think about the recreational community and the commercial community, and obviously each one of those has its own has a lot of different communities within it. I think it's a continuum from subsistence to recreational. I know a lot of folks who catch striped bass and take them home and eat them who are not subsistence fishermen. I think, and I think it's also worth saying that, yes, we're the American Saltwater Guides Association. We see the value of fish in the water. We're also not opposed to harvest. If you're taking a fish home for the table and recognizing, again, striped bass are every man's fish. This is a fish that somebody can easily catch, near their house with minimal expense. And there's a big value in that, and something that we are not trying to, take away from people. I don't know of any, larger kind of federal initiatives, as you said in the second part of that question, Rob, toward this issue. But I do think, it's an important thing to recognize that, while it might be, but while the quickest way to rebuild stripers might be to put a full moratorium on them and to get them back to where they need to be, as quickly as they can, there's a broader value in this fish to a lot of different people. And so there's always a task of trying to balance those different interests. And so I think, that's kind of a line that we try to toe, and certainly looking out for folks who enjoy catching and releasing them on a fly rod. And that's a huge part of the value that comes out of the fishery, but recognizing that needs to be balanced with others as well. And I think this is an inflection point right now for the fishery. We've got this, overfished stock. Hopefully we have these reductions that are gonna play out as folks are hoping they will, and we can start turning the corner here. But I think, hopefully we're in a position to be able to act now without having to take more drastic measures.
Cool. Another question here from Rob Lewis, and I'm going to ask Kyle to answer this one. April Vokey talks about catching your fish and you are done for the day. I know steelhead are in trouble, yet people on the East Coast are good with quote unquote releasing 50 plus schoolie stripers. What should we do? People don't think that way around here.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think, we actually kind of touched on this yesterday as we were kind of preparing for this call, but, and we talked about how, I don't think any of us are in a position to tell another how to fish. But I think we all need to think about, you know, and I think it kind of comes back to education, you know. So a lot of us are all sitting around in this room, or the people that have tuned in all know that there's an issue with striped bass, or we want to learn more about striped bass. So I think we're all going to go out there and we're going to maybe operate a little bit differently within our own fishery, just with that knowledge. And so maybe what we can do is just continue to inform people about what's happening with the striped bass fishery, continue to build advocates like Saltwater Guides Association is doing and these webinars are doing. And then when we enter our fishery to go have fun, you know, you might be thinking a little bit different. You might handle your fish a little bit different. You might, instead of catching that 50th schoolie, you might go look for a big fish in 3 feet of water on sand. You know, you might go sight fishing or do something that's going to be a little bit more challenging. I think there's still, you know, we all kind of go through that evolution of fishing where, you know, you're psyched to just catch a fish, then you want to catch a ton of them, then you want to catch a big fish, and you want to catch a big fish the exact way that you want to catch it. So, you know, I think it really kind of comes just back to education. And that's what we all can do, is just continue to try and learn and continue to try and tell all of our friends and anglers, you know, in a respectful way, just where the fishery is. And, you know, and hopefully we all can come together to operate and not continue to put too much pressure on these fish.
You're on mute, Ben.
Here's a question for you, Abby. How much and to what extent do recreational fishing tournaments contribute to striped bass mortality? Like Abby, I mainly fish in Martha's Vineyard and know that the 2020 annual Martha's Vineyard striped bass and bluefish tournament has removed striped bass as an eligible, quote unquote, weighable species. Do you see and anticipate more tournaments to switch to catch and release only? And how can increasing awareness be raised for this? And that's from Justin.
Hi, Justin. Thank you. I personally believe all tournaments should be catch and release. I fished the Derby my whole life. I love the Derby. As many people know, I've tried to help the Derby become a little bit more catch and release, if not fully. And I think if we are promoting this fisheries in general, actually, especially the one that I care about, I mean, I care about them all, but anyway, I think that it's a responsible thing to do. And if you are promoting people to go and fish there and want people to care about these fish, then you need to teach people how to act accordingly by releasing them and releasing them properly. I think it's a little bit more than just catch and release. I think you need to also educate people, like, you know, even if from shore, put it back with its head into the waves, not take it out into the sand for 10 minutes and take photos. And there needs to be responsibility with that too. But I do see a lot of tournaments going catch and release only. Yes, I hope so, at least.
I could add to that too, Abby. I think one thing is COVID-19. The Derby's canceled this year, so it's not even happening. And then a shout out to the folks at On the Water. They run that regional magazine in New England and in New York. And they run a huge striper tournament called the Striper Cup that runs over multiple months. And they took the action early this year, even before the Derby announced their catch and release initiative. They switched their whole tournament to a catch and release tournament, which was a major step because those guys, I mean, you're taking a ton of fish in that way. So a shout out to those guys for taking that step.
Awesome. And it also, like, changes people's mindset as well and teaches generations to come. I mean, I fished the Derby when I was young with my family. If it's catch and release, it teaches so many people how to respect the fishery that we're all enjoying. And it's not you, it's generations to come after you.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing too is you know, with this COVID-19 is our friends at Cheeky Fly Fishing had to cancel their tournament as well in Massachusetts. So next question here, and I'm going to open this up to whoever wants to take it. It's from Peter Fallon. Interested to hear thoughts about how we can more effectively connect with anglers outside of the fly fishing community. Preaching to the proverbial choir is still important. After all, the choir members are dedicated and committed, but we have a message looking for a larger audience.
So that's actually something that I have practiced to doing for quite some time. You know, I've been lucky enough to live in a state that is not full of fly fishermen, and so I've never found the choir. Still looking. It's a fly fishing state, just a destination, not necessarily we were born and raised to do it. You know, one of the things that I touched on earlier, and I think this is where we start to, you know, create a bit of a bridge, is we're all using the same water. We're all in the same spots using the same water. You know, I choose to do it in a more primitive fashion that isn't as effective. You may choose to do it in a way that yields plenty of fish. But the reality is that if we're all in the same, you know, eating off the same pie, it makes sense that we all work towards the same goals of making that pie as big and as robust as possible. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do in order to step back from the fly fishing mentality that has done me so well as an angler, and to start to put myself into the shoes of someone who I actually conveniently enough used to be, which was somebody who thought the only reason to fish was for sustenance and for a limit and for the opportunity to take that picture of all the fish on the dock, is that I've started to think of it as, okay, if I'm not going to release every fish, if I was going to keep some, what does that look like responsibly? How do I take what I think is important, which would be to let them all go, and find a common ground that I could have a conversation with someone who thinks we should keep them all? Because ultimately, when this is all going to be said and done, it's going to be everyone leaves the table a little bit unhappy, which is a good compromise, right? And so I think what I've been trying to do is to try and stop being so all the way on the other side and start trying to walk a little bit towards the middle and say to myself, okay, what does responsibly keeping fish look like? And where am I happy, or where could I find common ground with someone who thinks that they should be able to keep fish, which I actually think is perfectly fine as long as you're within the law and you're not poaching. But that doesn't mean that we need to keep all of the fish that we're legally allowed to keep. So, you know, that's sort of something that I've been trying to do lately, is say to myself, okay, if in Louisiana, the speckled trout limit is 25 per person, which is a little high in my opinion. What does look like a responsible number that would allow someone to take the pleasure out of fishing that they think they get from keeping those fish, but that would allow for the biomass to recuperate to a point that it could start to adjust for climate and start to adjust for all the other, you know, habitat loss issues that we're facing here. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but that's definitely something that I've been trying to do as a fly fisherman, is to try and put myself into someone else's shoes long enough to say, what does that good compromise look like? That the fishery is put first, and that then everyone walks away with a little something that keeps them able to enjoy, quote unquote, the fishery. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, that's really well said, Lucas. And I mean, one of the kind of keys, and we see this in Washington, where, you know, we always joke that with steelhead, it takes a certain amount of resilience and hard-headedness to want to go out and catch them. And when it comes to compromising, that hard-headedness and resilience is brought to the table as well, which makes these types of these things pretty challenging. But, you know, one of the things I think is really important is empathy. And you hear this a lot from folks who come out of the organizing world, who work in places where they're trying to build coalitions of diverse people who have different viewpoints. And there's an element of understanding that you need to have, and an understanding of the reasons why that people do the things that you do, even if you don't agree with them, may be good reasons. They're not evil people. And I think so often in the fly fishing community, at least in my neck of the woods, we have a tendency to demonize people who don't do things the way that we do things. And I think the key to starting to grow that tent is to have that empathy and be able to sort of just approach the other people as a human, as a fellow angler who has an understanding, and try to actually relate to them and come to that compromise, to come to that mutual understanding of what we need. And until you do that, if all you're doing is saying, hey, we want to grow the pie, we want to stop preaching to the choir, but like the people on the other side are a bunch of jerks who just want to go kill fish, then like you're not going to get there. And so it starts with also changing your own mentality and understanding who those people are and why and where they're coming from in all of this as well.
Yeah, and if I could add something to that too, Paul, and you've heard me say this before, you look at other charismatic megafauna, polar bears, orcas, people support conservation efforts around those animals, but they really have no direct contact with them. The reason why we care about our fish is we angle for them. I mean, you can't really see them unless you angle for them. So to me, the $50,000 question is, outside of preaching for the choir, how do you get people that aren't anglers to care about these fish and to take action as well outside of our community? And that's a really tough thing. And what is that? Why should somebody, for lack of a better term, like why should the soccer mom care about striped bass or steelhead for that matter, when she's writing a check to, the World Wildlife Fund to go save, polar bears? So I think there's that messaging as far as preaching to the choir and how you can get people motivated. Like if you can figure that out, what makes them special, why it's important from an ecosystem standpoint, what it means downstream for everybody, we can motivate people outside of our choir, the little bigger choir that's out there, and then way outside of that. So challenge is what I think it can be done.
Well, that's awesome. I really appreciate that. I think we're probably getting to a natural ending spot here. I saw. Oh, we got the same question that we had earlier. Okay, so I think we've got everybody here. I think we've answered all the questions that we had. For the Big Bang, as I called it, the Big Bang version of this, the first one, I feel like this was awesome. I hope everybody else agrees. We had a good turnout for this baby. We had lots of people chatting and talking it up, and we appreciate that. I can't thank you all enough, Tony, Willie, Abby, and Kyle, for coming on here and giving us some insight as to why we should love stripers, why you love stripers, and things that we can do about them. And if anything,
you want to preview next? What's next?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so we're leaving here. We're leaving this couch, and we're headed to the swamps of Louisiana, and we're going to talk about a little redfish activity and some of the challenges that we're facing down here with redfish. I alluded to some of it. But we're going to get in depth and talk with a couple, actually 4 total, myself included, guides down here who have witnessed some of the issues that we're facing with redfish. And so that will be on May 12th, next Tuesday. We will be back at this again. You can register on the Moldy Chum or AFTA's website. We'll send you there as well. And we hope that you register for that event and enjoy yourself there on that one. But once again, I want to thank Tony, Abby, Kyle, and Willie. And if you want to learn more information about the webinars that they're going to be doing on May 26th, just head over to AmericanSaltwaterGuidesAssociation.org and sign up for those babies, because we could all use more advocates for all of our fisheries. And the one thing that I want everyone to take away from this is that whether you live on any 4 corners of this country, we're all facing very similar issues. We're all working towards the same goal, which is to leave these fish in a place after we go that was better than we got here. So thanks everybody for joining us. If you have any last words, Paul, please, let's wrap this baby up.
I got one thing to add to that.
Sure.
Wherever you are across the country, make sure that you go to your local fly shop and spend some money. I mean,
yeah,
most important thing right now for our industry.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell my wife you said that and go clean the places out.
Go for it. Tell her I gave you the okay.
That's it.
Man. I'm looking for my wallet now.
Well, and in the same vein, the guides, Lucas, Abby, Kyle, the guides who are part of the ASGA, they're on the front lines of these fights. The reason they're able to take the time to go fly down to DC and go walk the hills of Congress to try to make a difference and protect our fish or show up at local meetings is because they're on the water. So the more you can support your guides who are conservation minded, like the 3 on this call and the many other that make up ASGA, the better. So if you have the means, book a trip.
And all the guides of AFTA as well. If we're going to just throw some love
we're going
out
to
there.
throw it out there. The 700+ guides of the American Fly Fishing Trade Association.
Yeah, anyone who has the ability, look at a AFTA guide, look at an ASGA guide. There's probably a ton of overlap, and just book a guide for later in the summer. In the fall, you'll give them a little bit of ray of hope. If you can't make it to your fly shop, about 99% of them, you can order stuff online. The community's really rallied. And we're going to need a little bit more. We're going to come out of this. We're going to be stronger. I'd like to take a second, thank Brian at Moldy Chum, Ben at AFTA, Lucas and Paul for having this brainchild. I really had a good time. I loved the approach, and hopefully folks learned a little bit about us or a little bit about the fish. So thank you all, man. This was a great opportunity and a great way to spend another night in quarantine.
If I had to do it from the couch, I wanted to be with all of you.
And your mozzarella.
Yeah, give me that big league chew, baby.
Yours, baby.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Take
So
care,
much
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
See you Tuesday.
Stay safe.
Forward to it.
Guys.
Thank you.